Your friend has got a lot to share.
And welcome to another edition. I guess this is the Thanksgiving edition of our radio friends again for the 17th of November, 2023. And as we last left, on our last episode last week, we were getting some really cool stories about some of you guys and, when you first got bitten by the bug, whether you were a kid or whatever it was, and maybe your first paid gig, or maybe it wasn't paid, but your first gig, and then how you ended up where you are today. And I was thinking I wanted to, I know Bob Craig has a pretty interesting story about how he got to where he is. And some of us has heard it before. So I thought that maybe we would stop off with Bob because he's still doing it today. So Bob, when did it first strike you that you thought you should go into the dark world of radio?
Well, I guess I was probably around 5 or 6 when I was just intrigued by the radio. I'll give you the shorter version of this. And by the way, if any of you would like to see a profile that I put together for my 60th, you can just simply go to Bob Craig WR. Just go to Google Bob Craig WRTI. And there it is. You can hear it. It's about 7.5, 8 minutes long. Has air checks, has jingles, and some of you have heard it. So anyhow, let me cut this down a little bit as best I can. So when I was intrigued by radio in the early 50s, it was mostly the music that caught my attention and how this music could be coming through this speaker, this radio. So with that in mind, I was just totally obsessed with it. And I just knew that someday I wanted to be involved in this business, whatever it happened to be. And I was very fortunate at a very young age to encounter a guy who wrote a column, a radio TV column for the Boston Daily Record. It was one of the newspapers in Boston where my father worked. And I would occasionally go in with him. And I happened to meet this guy. His name was Bill Buchanan. And I asked him, when I first met him, I said, "Are you the same Bill Buchanan who does a Saturday night big band show on WVDA?" And he said, "Yeah." And we became fast friends. And eventually he left the paper. He went over to the Boston Globe. And then while he was at the Globe, he took on a part-time job. By the way, he had also worked at WBZ doing a similar kind of program. But anyhow, he started doing a Sunday morning show at WPLM in Plymouth, Massachusetts. And he invited me to go down to spin records with him and sit in. First of all, I got to back up a little bit. I went to visit him at WVDA. I'm not thinking clearly here today, but anyhow, my father took me, I think I was about 11 years old. This is around 1955. Went up to the radio station to watch him do his program. And I mean, that was it. It was love, total love, walking in, seeing this guy sitting behind a microphone, being able to communicate with all these people, the records, the discs, everything was there. I said, this, there's no doubt this is for me. So when I went down to Plymouth, he had me spin records for him. And this was about 1958, 59. And from there, I met another engineer who was working at WHDH in Boston. And he said to me, "Why don't you go up and apply for a part-time job at WBZ for the summer? Because they hire radio engineers to run the board, and they take some of the guys from radio and put them into TV for the summer because it's easier to train radio people than it is TV." So I said, okay. So mind you, about 3 years before 1963, 1959, 1960, I went into WBZ back in the days where you could do things like this, walk into a radio station and kind of hang out with who's ever on the air. So I went over to WBZ and I happened to notice that BZ, I don't know if some of you know, Jim, you know the building, you work there. It's a huge building on Soldiers Field Road. You could probably tuck every radio station in Boston in there. And it was just a great throwback to like what radio was like, and they constructed the studios as such. So when I got to the station, I happened to notice there was a bunch of kids going in for a tour on the side entrance. So I joined up with him, walked into the radio station, and had this innate sense that radio was down a hall to the right. So I left the tour, walked down the hall by myself, opened a couple of doors. One of them said Studio A. Walked in there, and there was this big engineer sitting there, chopping on a cigar, working with a DJ. And I walked in and I said, "Hi, can I sit here for a few minutes?" And he said, "Yeah, okay, have a seat." I told him I was interested in radio. So about 10 minutes later, the general manager walks in and he says, who's this? Who's this kid? He said, "Oh, he has an interest in radio." And they said, "All right, he can hang out there for a few minutes, but not too long." I said, "Okay." So I was there for about 15 to 20 minutes. The engineer's name was Max Ortelt. I remember the name distinctly. So back to applying for a job at WBZ. I walked in there, had an appointment to see a guy named, actually, his name was Don Parker, not the Don Parker who was in Boston radio. I always seem to luck out with people named Parker. I don't know what it is. But anyhow, I interviewed and he said, "Well," he said, "I just hired the last guy for the summer replacement." But he said, "You can never tell. Something may develop, so I may need another person." I said, "Fine." This time I'm working, this is 1963 in the month of June. And I'm working at Jordan Marsh in Boston, which is a big department store. And I get a call. I did, my boss got a call. And he said, "There's a Don Parker on the line. We would like to talk to you." I'm saying to myself, "Oh shit, this is going to be good, hopefully." So I went over and got on the phone. He said, "Hey, I spoke to you about possible an opening." And he said, "I do have one, but it's only for about 3 weeks." He said, "Would you be interested?" I said, "Yeah." So he said, "Well, why don't you come over to the station and we'll talk some more." So he picked me up. I took the subway over Central Square, got in his car, and drove over to the station. So he said, "Like, this will be maybe 3 weeks." So I said, "Well, okay." I went back to my boss at Jordan Marsh, and he said, "Well," he said, "I know you are really interested in getting into radio." So he said, "Leave," because they wanted me to start on Friday. So I went over my first day, and I only tell this story because it's so cool. I walked into the station, walked into the studio, and there, sitting behind the massive RCA console, was none other than Max Ortelt. And I said, "Max, I don't know if you remember me, but 3 or 4 years ago, I sat in here with you for a while." He said, "Well, vaguely, I think I remember you." I said, "Well, I'm here today to relieve you on your shift. I'm taking over." So the job thankfully lasted till October of that year. And boy, what an experience. Working with these great DJs and getting help, putting together an audition tape, having people like Jeff Kay, Bruce Bradley, Dick Summer, these guys, kind of guiding me along. So I was out of work for, I don't know, 6 months. Wound up getting the first gig in Littleton, New Hampshire. And, the rest was kind of history. Littleton, New Hampshire to Ware, Massachusetts, to Springfield and HYM. This is now 1965. ICH in Norwich, which was probably one of the worst technical radio stations you could ever hear. The turntables did not have any fidelity to them. It was like no bass, no treble. So I took the job there and stayed there about 4 years. And it was a great learning experience because I eventually wound up programming the station into adult contemporary. We got some decent equipment, and the station really zoomed. It did really well. It was like contemporary. It was adult contemporary with a little mixture of Tony Bennett and Brazil '66 and people like that. So anyhow, that was that until 1970. I called Charlie and I said, "I'd like to come for an interview." He said, "Sure, come on over." So the day that I was to have the interview with Charlie, I sliced the side of my hand and needed stitches and a window at the radio station at WICH. Wait a minute. Let me get this right. I know what it was. I went over to I'm trying to get the timing of this right. I went over to DRC because I had the interview. And for some reason, I believe, yeah, I asked the receptionist, I have an appointment to see Charlie. She said, well, Charlie just left. So, Jesus. So I drove back to the station, called him the next day. He was profusely apologetic and said, let's do it again. I said, fine. So I drove up. I happened to cut my hand that day, but I still made the interview. That's what it was. So I took the interview and the audition with Bob Coe, and Charlie and I talked. And before I knew it, I was at the Big D over on the FM. And for that, thankfully, for 1 month, because as you guys know, the training ground on FM in those days was a 6-hour air shift, playing the records and nothing but trying to match the stereo renditions, because in 70, there were hardly any 45s that were stereo on one side and mono on the other. So they wanted the stereo. You had to play the album versions, which sometimes were longer tracks than the original 45s. So Joe Hager was doing the midday at that point, and I think it was Ken Griffin. Was Ken Griffin doing the midday? Anyhow, I guess he left or was let go, and they wanted Joe to do evenings and put me into the middays on AM. So I was only on the FM for a month, and that was it, 4 days. Now, Steve wants to know how the lunchtime thing happened.
Yep.
The lunchtime thing happened in Norwich, actually, where we had newscast on the top of the hour. And for some reason or another, the local news guy was not in the other studio. And I had to ad lib for about a half a minute or a minute. And for some strange reason, this idea of doing weird lunchtime concoctions came into my head. And that was it. And when I brought it over to DRC, so Charlie said, yeah, go ahead, try it, use it. So I did, and that was it. So known as the guy who did lunchtime. And after I was let go at DRC, POP for 6 months, and they went to All News. Then I was at HDH in Boston doing some part-time stuff, as well as down in Bridgeport. Again, Jim Harrington following my tracks. For some reason or other, we crossed paths at a number of gigs. Anyhow, I went to Bridgeport only with the agreement that I had with Press Gilmore when I talked to him about starting a format of YZ, of soft rock. He said, I'll tell you what, if you are willing to go to work in Bridgeport, do midday work and do some work on the music. He said, when the winter book comes out in early 76, or the fall book rather, he said, let's talk about this format. So the book came out, and WWYZ at that point was still like 16th in the New Haven, Hartford market. And I went to him and I said, well, what do you think? He said, well, let's talk about this format, of which he knew nothing about. So he called Mark Gilmore and his son, who was like an engineer at the station. And I'm, dropping names like the Moody Blues and Billy Joel and Joni Mitchell and yada, yada. So Press says to Mark, he said, what do you think? So Mark said, I think this could possibly work. So in June, the first day of summer in 76, we put YZ on the air, which was frantic time because we didn't have enough music, and I kept adding music every day. I hardly had any staff, and we were patching that together. And eventually it took shape, and back in those days with FM radio, when you put a format on the air, you knew within a week or two whether or not it was a winner. And every time I drove from Waterbury back to my apartment in East Hartford, everybody seemed to be listening to YZ. You'd pull up next to a car, they would have it going. Even my apartment complex, I walked down the halls and I'd hear YZ going in the stores. So we knew we had a winner. And about 2 weeks after that, CBS FM spot sales calls and said, hey, we'd like to come up and rep you. Do you guys have a national rep? And they said, no. So CBS came up. They wound up repping us to national sales. The station was a big success. And then 79, about 3 years later, I got a call from Philly, Norwich, to be interested. Would I be interested in coming down to Philadelphia because they heard about Magic, heard about YZ. And so we have this station called Magic in Philadelphia. We put it on in 75. It's similar to what you do, but it's a little more poppy. And I said, yeah. So Julian Breen, who was the national PD for Greater Media, came up to Hartford. We had dinner and talked. And the next weekend, I was down in Philly for an interview. And Greater Media was just a really terrific private company that had a few radio stations at that time. They had New Brunswick, New Jersey, they had Sturbridge, Massachusetts, where they started, they had Philly. And I had about 3 interviews with them. They were very patient. And by April, I said, okay. So I went down there and I picked up the reins from the PD who had left. And about 6 months after that, we decided we wanted to refresh the format and get away from a lot of the album cuts, focus more on adult contemporary. And I wasn't totally happy with that. And I said, I'd still like to retain some of the classic album cuts that we were playing, the Joni Mitchell album. You know, these people that had not only hit singles, but hit albums because everybody was buying these things. So we had a mixture of some of the popular album cuts from those people, as well as adult contemporary artists that were also having a lot of hits at that time. Stations zoomed up to a 9 share in Philly. We were #1 for, God, I think for almost my 9 years there in 2554. One book we missed out on. So that was a very successful run. And after that, I wound up going over to another adult contemporary station, which was a horrendous experience because I was totally governed by a consultant, Bill Moyers, and I hated it.
Oh.
And eventually they asked me to leave after 6 months because I wanted to do my own thing and I hated it there and I was out of there. So I wound up going back to Greater Media at WMGK to do a smooth jazz show on weekends, and eventually walked down the hall and did WPEN. And there I remained at PEN until 2004, when they abolished their adult standards format and went to an oldies format, and then eventually to all sports. So I was retired at that point in the year 2005, and I said, this is not for me being retired. They gave a nice severance, but it was just not enough. So I called WRTI, which was Temple University's classical and jazz station. They said, come on over, I'll talk. They had me doing fill-ins, doing jazz, which I like. And I've been there for 18 years now. That's, in a nutshell, the story. And I really have no intention of leaving it. Next April, I will be 80 years old, and I hope to be on the air when I am. Ted's clapping. He's already there, right, Ted? Did you hit the big 80 this year?
Oh, I hit it in October 7th.
That's what I thought. So anyhow, 80 in April, I hope to be on the air on April 22nd. And
hey, Bob, Petula Clark just turned 93 and she's still singing.
I saw that.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
By the way, if you ever make your way back up here, Bob, I have all of Julian Breen's paper files going back to that era.
Of course you
sitting
do.
here. I've got boxes and boxes and boxes.
He does. He does.
Yeah, Julian was something else. God, I don't know. Do any of you know Julian or know of Julian Breen?
I know of Julian. I was told there was the original Julian. Then after he had his heart attack, he mellowed out, and there was the new Julian.
Yeah, we used to
That's
fight.
right.
We used to fight quite a bit because he was dead. He just loved focus groups and he loved detailed information. And he would question me sometimes on music that I would put in that didn't test well. And I said, Julian, you know, if you program a song that is not that familiar and you program it between a couple of really well-known songs, nobody is really going to tune out. So we'd fight like that. And, you know, eventually he would give in because when you're sitting around with high ratings, nobody's really going to argue with you if you
Right. They
seem to be
listen.
doing the right thing. So we had our ups and downs there, but I always respected Julian because he was a terrific radio guy. He was a complete nerd about radio.
The
And
best.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the best Julian story I heard from Jack Cradaville was that someone walked in his office demanding a pay increase. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out the McDonald's hat and said, "Want a career move?"
Yeah, he was really something. Unfortunately, he died really too young, and but just he was Rick Sklar's assistant at WABC back in the '60s, and he apparently learned a lot from him. Sklar came up to Magic one day to see Julian, and he just put out this book. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's called Rocking America. It's a story of Rick Sklar's career, which was quite interesting, and the success that he had at WABC and all that. And he gave me a copy of his book and signed it. But the WMGK, Greater Media, Philadelphia have been very, very good to me. And I have no intention of ever leaving here. This is home. Been here 44 years, and I thought I'd be here maybe 3 years and go back to New England because I hated to leave Hartford. I really liked Hartford a lot. But that's the radio story.
Now, Bob, how many times, and only because we keep running into this, and there's some people that just kind of gotten soured on the business because they didn't feel in today's world they were getting the cash that they deserved, and as a result, kind of went off to the side to wait for the money to come around. I mean, yeah, obviously, you adjust your lifestyle, but isn't it much better to be doing any form of it than not doing it at all?
Yeah, the fortunate thing that I have at WRTI, which is Temple University's radio station, is that they let me do what I want to do with the music. And it's just kind of like, what I would do at home. And, I enjoy the music that I'm playing, and their facilities are good. And I don't know, they just added a Sunday morning a program for me because the other guy retired. So I'm going twice a week to record a few hours of a show that is a big band and voices and big band jazz show. And then on Sunday morning, I do what is called the Sunday morning jazz brunch. So, I think that if you really map out what you want to do in the radio business, it may take a little while to find it, but it really is the radio business. It's the business of radio now. And you really kind of have to adapt if you want to be in it in any form at all. It's nothing that it was like years ago, obviously, where there was a lot of focus and attention on you as a performer. But what I really enjoyed more being on the air is programming. But programming is a whole different game today than it was back in those days. I mean, you are a content manager now or a marketing manager, and a lot of people who are involved in programming, don't really have any idea of what it's like to get into the nuts and bolts of the people who are on the air, if there are any live, and working with the emotions like Charlie did. Charlie knew how to gut the emotions of people who were listening to his radio station. He knew, who their audience, who his audience was. And that's one of the important things about programming. You just don't throw music on the air. I mean, if you're seriously involved in programming, you got to understand the whole concept of it. You have to work with promotions and with sales, and it's a tough gig. It's not the easiest job in the world. There's no way in hell that I would deal with it today, because I see what some of these people are going through as programmers, and I just would not be involved in something like that. It would interest me.
Bob, the problem I think is companies expect these program managers to program like 4 stations in a market, and they don't, which says to me they don't recognize the importance of how important it is to program one station well. They figure, well, get this guy in here, he'll program the news talk, the AC station, the rock station, the oldies station, and they think nothing of it. And I think that's wrong. I think that's where they've fallen down.
They don't know radio. They don't know radio.
No, that's it. You get a general manager probably that was a manager at Campbell Soups, and because he has great credentials as a manager, he doesn't know how to manage a radio station, which is a totally different concept and feel than, you know, managing an insurance company or a bank or whatever. A radio is such an intimate, or was such an intimate business, that you have to understand emotions, you have to understand talent, you have to understand audience and the total makeup of what your product is all about. But you really have to feel it. It's like, you know, it's kind of like jazz. I'll make a very strange analogy, but it's like jazz musicians. There are a lot of terrific jazz musicians around today, but there's hardly any Stan Getz, there's hardly any Ben Websters, there's hardly any kind of Miles Davis. They don't play from the gut, they play from their head, what they learned in school. That does not communicate well when you're dealing with emotions at all. So that's the sad part about a lot of music today, and pop music. I mean, don't even get me started on that.
Well,
Steve Lawrence had a great line one time. He said, I don't have anything against rap music, but he said, I'm waiting for the second chord. That's, you know, kind of what you're going to say, Ted?
To Jim's point about, you know, they have one guy programming 4 stations in the market, but he's working for the same company, the same conglomerate company that owns all the media. So from their bottom line, they're spending less money having one guy program 4 stations. And if you take the cumulative effort of all the fractionalization of the station listeners, then they still get a bigger share and they're making more money because they're selling bulk sales. And that's
exactly right. It's
all
about the money.
That's where the money
That's
is.
exactly right.
Also about putting fires out, because I know that in all the years that I was even down at Channel 8, and Ted knows because he was there. I mean, it was all about, you know, you're hired to do a job. And, you know, like, you know, my boss said, most important part of your job is to show up. They've got so many other things they've got to worry about. And even right now, where my boss pretty much runs Hartford and Boston, you know, he said right up front, he goes, I go in, I fix the problem, I move on. And, you know, that's really it. And I think, you know, it is something that I mean, Ron knows. I mean, it's like, you know, as Ron has said, it's the greatest compliment in the world. I can wear a lot of hats, and I'd rather wear any hat in that building versus not being in the building. So one of the things that probably frustrates me the most right now is my radio station has absolutely no use for me. All the stations in Hartford have absolutely no use for me if I, other than 3 hours on Saturday morning, which I love. I really love what I'm doing, but there's nobody there who ever sits down and says, why don't I have Parker fill in over here? That never comes up as a discussion. It's like, I'm the Saturday morning guy. I've been told we hired you for what you do. We're not doing it anywhere else. And I just, you know, I'm happy with it, but that's just like, I think like PDs or whatever, or operations guys or whatever right now are all problem solvers. They're all just trying to make sure they can keep big fat cat happy and keep their own job.
Well, you work for a guy, Steve, who is very hard-headed, very set in his ways, and is overworked as well. You know, tell everybody what else Sal Haney does.
Oh, I mean, you know, Sal Haney basically watches over all these radio stations, and he just has, I guess, well, they used to be called program directors, and now they're brands managers. And there's never been so much of, I mean, to have a PD say, as long as it makes money, I mean, that's a whole different world. I mean, it's got to make money, but when they're making that the number one priority, that's kind of a scary thing. You know,
but Sal Haney, doesn't he also operate Boston? Does he oversee Boston?
Yeah, no, he does. He does all of Hartford and all of Boston, and he.
I mean, that's impossible.
Yep, and it's all for Odyssey. So they've got big stations everywhere. You know, that's how they operate.
So that's why Steve Parker does a great job on Saturday mornings. He fulfills the services that we need, and that's what we have to worry about. Move on.
He always appreciates the fact that I'm always looking for another job. Or, you know, my favorite one was, you know, someday, Steve, Ray Dunaway is going to leave. Someday, Ray is going to leave, and Ray left. And I said, so Steve, he goes, we decided we're going to go with the team approach. And I'm like, yeah. So you mean we don't have to replace that guy and we save that salary? Great talking to you. But
that's what I got.
I really do love what I do, and I really do love he says it half jokingly, but I really believe when Steve Sal Haney says my wife and I like to sleep in on Saturday mornings, I always go, please keep sleeping, man. You know.
I got the same deal when I came back to TIC. Was that, you know, we want you to do middays now because Steele is going to retire. someday
Yeah.
soon. He's gonna call it quits because he's already old. He's been there forever, but maybe a year, maybe 2 years, but then he's going to be gone and you can move right in. And I can remember one time when he actually took a vacation, which was almost unbelievable at the time because without that show, he didn't have a life. So he was going to be gone for 2 weeks. And they put me in to do the morning with Arnold Dean, because Dean used to do sports for him
Yep.
also after the first guy left. But so we were just sitting doing the show, and we were having a good time. I thought we were having a really good time. Came off the thing, and at one point I said to Perry Urey, who was the station manager at the time.
Yep.
And I said, Perry, so what do you think? I said, how did it go? And he looked at me and he said, well, you guys laugh too much. And that was it.
Too good a time. That's right.
Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, so you want the morning people not to have anybody laugh? I mean, I couldn't fathom the fact that they actually expected it to be like a library session or a lecture, which Steele, of course, did, but that was Steele. So if he was going to be gone, what were they going to look for next? They're going to look for another Bob Steele. And that was not me, for sure. But it was really, it was just unfathomable. I mean, it's just unbelievable.
It turned out to be Arnold Dean and Tom McCarthy, and that didn't last very long. That lasted a very short time.
Of course, because probably they laughed too much.
Yeah.
I wonder how many guys who went through DRC, worked for Charlie, and I worked for him for 8 years, thought that they could leave WDRC and go somewhere as a program director and take what they learned from Charlie and transform a station into a leading station in a market. And how many people actually did that you know of?
I think it's pretty hard to copy what Charlie Parker did.
Not copy, but just take.
Yeah. I don't know anybody who did.
No, I don't either. The thing that I learned from Charlie is that you give somebody their head and let them go, and chances are, if you pick the right person, you're going to get what you want. And he was doing that with you, and he was doing that with Bob and Dick McDonough, and Mike Holland, everybody that was just creative. Jim Harrington. The only reason I got the job there is because Jim left and he had to fill a space, and I happened to be there at the right time.
Yeah, but he really did. He really, really did know what he knew what everybody was doing that he hired, from what I could gather, and he also knew what they were capable of. So, and where he really did. It always sounds like I say the same thing all the time, only because I've only had limited experiences, with working, like at Kiss FM when I worked for and not with a program director who let me show you how to do it. And my dad was really like, if he hired a bad boy, if he hired a shock jock, he knew what he got. He used to write Reynolds' monologue before he went on the air. I mean, my dad was the biggest kid in that. If he knew at night, that's what that guy was supposed to do. If he hired somebody like that, I mean, when some of these guys went off the skids and did whatever they wanted to do, and like Joey with the dumb broad thing, and Otis did something one time that he was told not to do, he knew he hired a bad boy. And when he had a certain person he wanted to hire because he saw a direction he could take them in. And that's what I think was great about he really did direct. And I used to joke about the fact that he could also sit down with the janitor at Travelers and tell him how to get out of cleaning bathrooms and get up to the next level, because he told me how to do that.
He was really high on when he hired somebody. He had done his homework, and when he hired the guy, it was like he had a new toy. He really was high on the new talent. I remember seeing him hire people, and he was just enthusiastic. I remember going to his office and he'd be listening in his radio to the guy's show, whoever he just hired. Doesn't he sound good? He knew what he was doing. It was never really a guess for Charlie, because by the time he hired you, he knew what you were going to do.
Well, Jim, I have to interrupt you on that one. There was one talent that both of us kind of got screwed on. I think he was replacing you.
Well, there's always
Ted.
one, Dave. There's always one.
I think he was replacing you, Ted.
Yeah, Steve Dunn. Oh no,
Steve Dunn.
No, I was still on FM when Steve Dunn came in. I replaced him.
Yeah, and John Landry was his engineer. I remember that.
Yeah.
And it was he did a great audition. He was funny and that.
Yeah.
And so Charlie and I listened to the audition together. He says, it's good. He says, what do you think? And he says, I hire him, and so we had to convince Corson. So we're in there playing the tape to Corson. Corson's like, well, I don't know, and so Charlie talked him into doing it, and he says, well, all right, okay. Well, his first day on the air, I was coming in from Bristol at the time, and I remember going up Route 6, and I heard him, and I nearly drove off the road. I says, where's the guy that we had at the audition? He was terrible. He was terrible. John, tell him the story about the news when you were working the board. CBS News.
I don't remember. I never paid it for the guy. I was busy
John, you're
ready.
Yeah. John, you told the story, and all of a sudden it comes top of the hour or the bottom of the hour. He points to you, and you look at him like going, "What do you want from me? I don't." And he's going, CBS News, and I very vividly remember you were confused, and then he went to a record. Huh? Yeah, he came out. And said, yeah, and he says, "Where's CBS News?" And John says, "CBS News? We don't run CBS News. DRC stopped running CBS News for when they turned rock and roll, and back in the 60s. It was just...
The only thing I remember about Steve Dunn is he got through with his air shift. Bob was on the air for the 10 o'clock show, and he walked out of Charlie's office and came into the control room, and he said, well, they let me go. And he kept on walking. That was the only thing I really remember about him.
Yeah. Well, Bob, Steve was also very good in production. He was very good doing production stuff. I learned a couple things from him, but a real nice guy, but he just, I walked into Charlie's, first time I heard him on the air, I walked into Charlie's office, and Charlie looks up at me and goes, what the hell just happened? And I go, I don't know. So I think 2 or 3 days later, Charlie told Corson that, give him some time. He's got to fill in and, get settled. And it was like at the end of 2 weeks.
Well, that was it. Sometime in the first week, it was like first couple of days of that. And when I was doing middays then, and I had to follow him, and I figured he was killing the whole audience for the whole station.
Yeah.
It was so awful. So I went into Charlie's office, and I leaned on his desk before I went on the air, and I just said, Charlie, when you finally get rid of this guy, and I know you will very soon, I said, I want a chance to do the morning show. And he said, oh, really? As your dad would say, yeah, okay, well, that's interesting. And then it was like a week and a half later, and Charlie came into me while I was on the air, and he said, look, we have a problem. We need somebody to take your place in midday. But we can move you to afternoon drive on FM and cut the time period shorter if you will do mornings at the same time and do a split until we can find somebody. It should be about a week or two. And I wanted to do the morning. So I said, fine. He said, I got more money to do it anyway. And he said, fine, I'll do it. So I started doing mornings on AM and FM, and then coming back at, I think it was probably 3 o'clock, instead of doing 3 to 7, instead of 2 to 7. And I did 3 to 7 at night, and then in the afternoon drive. And I did that for a little while, and it was going okay until I realized that I was going to sleep, waking up, going to sleep, waking up. And after
no life.
And weeks went on, it was like week 4, I'm still doing this. And I said to Charlie, I walked in, I said, Charlie, I don't know what day it is, much less which station I'm on right now, because I'm so confused when I wake up. I said, when are you going to find somebody? And that's when he brought in Mike Taylor. And Mike Taylor came in and filled that time slot. And then I got back down to just doing 1 time slot instead of 2 during the mornings. But that was just an incredible lucky break for me that they hired Steve Dunn. If they had hired somebody good, I might have.
He took Pete Sullivan's place.
Yeah, I took Pete Sullivan's place. Right?
Yeah.
And I thought Sullivan was great. I couldn't understand why they fired him.
Did you ever notice how some DJs sounded terrific on a real good radio station that was a winner? Then when they go to another radio station, it was the same person doing the same thing, but they didn't have all the tools. And that station, and they just did not sound the same, didn't have the same level of talent, for lack of a better word. They just didn't sound right at another radio station. But when that whole winning combination of the sound, the promotions, the DJs that surrounded them, the person who was calling the shots, just, really all comes together. And so many times that has happened. So one DJ does not carry a whole radio station, it seems,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They can ruin a time slot.
What?
They can ruin a time slot, that's for sure. And the lead into the next one.
Yes.
Do you guys find the sound of the station, the actual technical sound of the station, adds a lot to your presentation?
Yeah, DRC was in a class by themselves.
I worked at
No doubt about it, Jim.
I worked at 3WS in Pittsburgh for a while, and it's an oldie station. It's owned by iHeart now. It was owned by Clear Channel, then J-Core, Clear Channel, the whole. And they were on the north side of Pittsburgh, and they had nice studios, great studios, and it sounded fantastic. The presentation, the compression, everything. You sounded great on the air. And they moved to these digital studios about 5 miles away, took all the presence out of it, all of the
flat sound.
It sounded dead, Dave. It sounded
I
dead.
know. It's a flat sound.
And all of a sudden, when you're on the air doing over, you could be on for 6 hours, and it just felt great. You go over to this other place, you could be on the air for 2 hours, and it never ended. It's like it sounded awful. I don't know that they've ever fixed it, because when they made the move, they also cut back on management and staff, and I don't know whether they ever bounced back. You guys, we talked about the brand managers and how they have 4 or 5 stations, and what Ron said is true. The guys who incorporate, they're happy because they're actually making, in some instances, more money.
Yep.
But actually, it really, radio today, when you listen to it, you go from city to city, they all sound the same because you have one guy programming in all these different markets. But they never go to the level that I think we went to back in the 70s and 80s. I mean, when guys were on the air back then, when they said personalities, they were personality. They were respected too by management for the most part. They were respected for what they brought to the table. Then management, maybe it was 96 when they, all of a sudden you had the bankers owning all these different radio stations. They thought of us as tubes. Replace him, stick him in here. Can he speak English? Fine. We'll put him right here. We'll make him morning man. They didn't have the same criteria anymore. They didn't look at all the different guys. And
they didn't understand radio, Jim.
No,
they didn't understand it at all.
Absolutely right.
That's what happens when you get bean counters running radio stations.
Right.
Yeah, and the thing is, those bean counters now own all the radio stations.
Yeah,
and they can't figure out why Odyssey was just kicked off the stock market, the stock exchange, because their stock went so low. Right. They finally said, "Oh, okay, you're done. You're at."
You guys are all purists. You're all radio purists, which is a wonderful thing, and that's exactly why we're talking here.
Mm-hmm.
But traditionally, in a top 10 radio station in a top market would split their advertising about 60% local and 40% national, maybe 70-30. Okay. But to your point about who's running the radio station, if you've got a 4 or 5 station cluster and you take that 40% of your national business and put it on, and by the way, local business, radio sales guys got to go out, make a relationship with a client, and then got to produce results. Somebody's got to walk in off the street and say, "Hey, I heard your spot on WDRC. I want to, what do you got? Because I heard your spot." Well, that's how radio advertising works. Well, national advertising doesn't work anything like that. If you hear a spot for Heinz ketchup on a station, they don't care about, they want to know in terms of how many bottles of ketchup was sold in the United States that week. Not worried about Hartford, Connecticut. So if you aggregate all the 40% from the 4 or 5 radio stations, you add it all up, bean counters are happy. Hey, look how we're doing. we're doing great. We're making money. Bottom line is great. They don't care that, they don't care, Jim, that, who the program director is, as long as the ratings are there. Obviously, you got to have some ratings. But you put the 4 stations together, everything's fine.
I think the thing is though, I think that what they're hurting themselves, because they're looking around saying, "Oh, we're satisfied. We're making a lot of money. Look at we have mediocre staff, mediocre management. We have nothing on the air that's special, and we're making millions of dollars." What they don't know is if they had great staff, great management, talented people, real personalities, would it bring it to the next level, and would they make more money exponentially? So right. I mean, I know what you're saying, and you're right. I think they're very satisfied because hey, they're making a buck.
Jim, yeah, although they're bringing in all the we'll say top name personalities in that. Remember, you're spending money to make more money, and these guys want to spend less and get more.
Sure. I know.
Dollar, and that's a big problem.
Talent's an expense, and sales is income, and that's
it.
It's always been that way, but they used to be willing to spend more money and pay a little more expense for people to put together a good station. And now they've cut it back, as we know, like everything else. I remember even in the 60s when they quit doing cigarette commercials, national cigarette ads. And the station I was at in Toledo, Ohio, suddenly lost this. It was a legacy station, so they had a whole bunch of cigarette ads. And in 1 month, boom, these national sales were gone. And the guys in the sales department were going nuts because they said, how are we going to fill the time? We can't make any money, because this stuff was carrying them through a whole bunch of other things. So suddenly they're out on the street, to your point, Ron. They're out on the street scrambling, banging on doors for local guys to fill the time slots, to fill the ad spots that they need to pay the bills on the station.
And you're so right. A big national account could spend, I remember when I was at TIC, Coke would spend $20,000-$30,000 a month on TIC FM. About that. The AM, right across all the AM, they'd have to go out and get 10 or 15 accounts. On average, $2,000 to make up that one account. It's impossible.
Yeah, Coke sent a balloon down for me to do the show. Jim and I were doing. Jim Harrington and I would.
I wouldn't get the damn thing.
I was up in the basket, and they sent the balloon guy down, put us up tethered next to I-84, and I did the morning show out of the balloon. I mean, I remember that. And then he cut us loose, and we're going across Windsor. We finally landed in some field out in Windsor, and after tree topping and a whole bunch of stuff, was one of the most interesting ideas in my life. When you're hanging there doing the morning show with listening to Jim Harrington in one ear, myself on the radio in the other ear, 2 microphones in my hand, because then we had to use a microphone for the microwave unit for on air, and then use another one for communication. And I had one sitting on the edge of the basket because all this equipment was in the bottom, and we're up at 100 feet on a tether line. And I'm sitting there with one arm hung around the wire. And that was it. It's the only thing holding me up there.
And, Ted would be up there, and he would be talking, and it'd be nice and quiet. And all of a sudden, the guy would hit the burner.
Yeah,
it was like being under a jet engine.
I know. We had explosions going, and it was hysterical. But it was they went to the expense to do that because they were spending money in the market at the time. And
we had I remember that Wayne had just gotten the Marty unit, which is a small transmitter to the balloon, and then come back to us, and we would put it on the air. And Wayne was in the balloon with you, because it was either going to be Wayne or myself. We're going to be in the balloon with you down on the floor. I was the backup guy, and thank God he went up there, not me. And and I think I ran the board for that. Or John, were you there when they did that? Maybe you were the runner. Huh?
Yeah, I remember running the board.
I thought you were running the board. I know I was roaming in and out in that, and just listening and such. But that was an extreme, very interesting remote that we did with Ted the balloon.
As I recall, at the end of the flight, Ted was landing, and I think that you landed and the basket tipped, and you were dragged several hundred feet before it was stopped.
Absolutely.
Ted, did you get the
drag the guy behind the horse? We're going down.
Ted,
shutting the burners down. I mean, the burners are still on. We're landing sideways on the ground.
Ted, did you get the champagne after?
Oh,
It's just
yeah.
customary to give the champagne.
Yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
don't know.
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
But I remember Phil Stebbin. Phil Stebbin is the Rainer bird flying out of the parking lot on Blue Hills Avenue because Jim Raynor had the Rainer bird, which was his character, and the Rainer bird was going to fly out to California, I guess, and go to KGIL or something. But they were doing like a coast-to-coast promotion with the Rainer bird. So here's Phil in a parking lot dressed up like this giant bird. And all of a sudden, you know, he's all the kids and the fans and everything are in the parking lot watching the Rainer bird take off. And he gets in his helicopter. I think Dick Futner, who was our helicopter traffic reporter back then, who worked out of Tomaso, I think, he has a cigar in his mouth and a leather jacket and a big glass thing on the front. And here's just, you know, Phil getting on board the thing, and they take off. And then my sister, my dad, and myself had to drive down like one of the farms, AC Peterson Farm or something, and the helicopter landed there, and we grabbed Phil and put him in the car and brought him back to the station. I don't know. That was just the promotion for the Rainer bird. And shortly before Jim Raynor passed away, I was able to connect with him, and he was in a like assisted living up someplace, and 1,000% with it. We were talking, and at the end of the conversation, after reminiscing and everything, he says, and Steve, by the way, the Rainer bird is alive and well and living in South America with a beautiful toucan. And that was like, the last words from Jim Raynor. But yeah, I have a letter somebody gave me from Fred Allen one time, and back in the 30s. And Fred Allen back then said that the people that, you know, run and own radio stations have absolutely no business being in the business because they don't have a clue about it. And, you know, Dick Buckley, I think, you know, and Dick was Rick's dad. He really did. I mean, he was a radio guy from an owner's standpoint, as I remember. That's what Dick was.
Yeah, he owned NEW.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, Dick Buckley knew people's names. I was working part-time there at DRC, and I was doing summer relief, and I had met him maybe a month, 2 months prior to that. You know, hi, how are you? I'm Dave Overson. That was it. Well, I'm going down the hallway, and Mr. Buckley says to me, he goes, Dave, he says, here, get himself some soda out of the soda machine. And Corson had removed the soda machine out of the building, and I could see Corson's look on his face, like, and I just looked down. I said, well, unfortunately, the soda machine is out on repair. I says, I can run upstairs to the 16th floor and get that. Yeah, Dave, good job, David. You're Dave, he called me. And I went up and got that. But here's a guy who could remember your name, you know, and only met him briefly.
Yeah, he used to go around to even the office people when he'd come in. It was kind of like party time at the station. He'd bring in, you know, booze, and I guess they just, you know, had a great time. Hey, going back to the sound of the radio stations, do you guys remember, and this was only very briefly, that DRC took off the reverb?
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yep.
Oh, yeah. The station did a 180. It just didn't sound like DRC at all technically, and the energy didn't seem to be there for the rest of us on the air.
Yeah, I know McDonough was really bummed out, and because I was running the board, and he's, you know, it sounds so dead, you know, and it didn't have that ring to it.
The first time, I think I've mentioned this before, the first time I heard DRC was in January of 1966. I was driving from Ware, Mass to Amherst, and I ran across this station on my tinny car radio in my 1957 Volkswagen, and this station come blasting through on Route 9. I said, where the hell is this coming from? Because they had the Series 27 jingles from Pam's, and I was shocked to hear it came from Hartford. I said, man, what a radio station this is. I'd love to work there someday. And I remember when I was at HYM in the summer of ’65, the kids who would call the radio station would ask, could you play this certain song, whatever it was? And we said, well, no, we don't have it in as yet. I said, well, DRC is playing it. It's kind of like all the hip kids in Springfield listen to DRC. It was that kind of a magnet, you know, that drew you to listen. HYM was a horrendous radio station, not only to work at, but to listen to. We had 13 spots an hour, and Zach Land was a madman. and you couldn't do anything at all. It was just terrible.
I want to.
You know, you guys talk about WDRC having a certain sound because of everything, all the ingredients, all the elements that make up the station and a show. I was off the air from 83 to 91, and I started working at this Christian radio station, Christian FM, as the morning man. And when I got back on the air, I thought to myself, it couldn't be any more different than WDRC. Not only that, but I was using my real name. It was Bart Mazzarella, not Bob Marks. One day, I got my receptionist said, "You got a call. You got to take this call." So I took the call. It was a lady who was driving through our area, and she said, "I know that you're not really Bart Mazzarella. I know you're really Bob Marks from WDRC." She said, "I was listening to the show." She said, "And it's unmistakable that you're the guy, right?" I said, "You got me. Yeah, that's right." I could not fathom how she put the two of us together because the sound was completely different.
Your voice is the same off the air as on the air. Bob, there's no mistaking you. You can't.
Yeah, but I use the name Bart Mazzarella.
Doesn't matter. That's why people have said, "Well, Steve, you could go somewhere else in the market and change your." No, you can't. They know your style.
Steve, why don't you get a job as a PD? You've learned a lot from your dad.
Because there's nobody there that would ever hire me as that, because it's just, I don't even think PDs exist anymore. My goal really was, the reason I went through sales and dressing up as bees and answering the phones and request and working in any part of the building.
Because you're a nut.
Well, no, my goal was to, by 40, I really wanted to be a GM. I really did, because I knew enough from my dad and other things to know how to hire the right people, I felt, for the different departments. I really felt by doing all that was my goal. And at 40 years old, that was when pretty much all the other, guys came in as PDs and started managing all the different stations. And I always do. I talk about the fact that, when Clinton did the deregulation of the air, he also did the airwaves. And that's where everything got screwed up and all these other things, happened. It was just that. But, but that's a heck of a compliment. I thank you. I mean, that was what I would have, loved to do, but
I think you'd be great at it. You'd build a winner, I'm sure.
Thank you. Somebody said that one time. Why don't they just throw you in there and try it out? I remember Ron Pell with Ann Block one time said, "Oh, they're looking for a program director at WDRC. You should give them a resume." I said, "If they don't know what I do by this time in my life, forget about it. I don't think it's a resume." Judge, I wanted to ask you real quick, because I know Judge is always great, and he really had a lot of the experience over on the POP side and a lot of other stuff. Judge, do you think it would be possible, to get Lee and maybe some other guys sometime to come on and talk about that? Because it'd be interesting. We've heard a lot from the DRC camp. It'd be interesting to hear how you guys dealt with stuff back then on the other side of the swamp. But, I remember, is that something that you may be able to reach out to some of the people? I don't know. I know Grease used to deny that he ever worked there, but maybe some of the guys.
I will send out an email and let people know that this is available. But and again, it wasn't a swamp; it was a wetland.
Oh yeah,
and it didn't smell.
I still yell POP stinks when I drive by it, and I worked there for a long time. What do you want from me? No, but yeah, and it was, of course, we grew up in that world of Hooper and Pulse and all the other rating services, and people didn't realize that when you're when you live book to book in the house, it was tough. My dad never turned the radio off. Never, ever, ever did. And I remember one time lying next to him in bed, and he was there, and he'd still have his tie and shirt on and everything, and he'd be listening late at night. And he was always smoking. And one time he said to me, he says, want a cigarette? Wow, this is great. I said, yeah, sure. So I was probably 12 or something. And he lit it, and I was smoking with Dad. I thought that was cool. He goes, inhale it. So what do you mean? He goes, yeah, take it right down into your lungs. Take it a good inhale. I choked and choked and choked. He goes, you want to smoke? I said, nope. That was it for that.
He was teaching you a lesson that he should have known.
I think we should have a moment of observance for this week coming up. to the Great Turkey promotion in DRC.
Oh,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know
There you
something?
go.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
You know
I got a bunch
something?
of them.
Ed did an amazing job on that. And the fact that Ed has all of that, you really should, if you haven't heard it or be part of it, go to Ed's site and just listen to some of those things. And maybe, I think last year I sent out the memo, but maybe I'll send the memo again about, think top line, think Orson Welles. And everybody, even the ad libs were written 24 hours a day. And I think that was kind of cool. My dad, nothing made him happier than, scaring the heck out of people. My sister, Dad, I think we got to go downstairs and get up to the top of 750 Main Street, and then with our cameras. And Kathy, just calm down. It's all fine. But yeah, all right, Dave, I'll get out of here. But thank you guys so much, and everybody. I have to say happy Thanksgiving, but also, as corny as it sounds, thanks a lot for giving your time so much for so long. This is always the best. So God bless all of you, and we'll talk again next week. Anything else? Do you want to add anything before we go?
No,
Steve.
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving.
All right, guys. I'll talk to you later. Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Your friend has got a lot to share.